All Quiet on the Western Front, a historical documentary trip written by Owen Levy. Chapter 1, Opening. This documentary is personal to me because when I was in year 10, I was supposed to visit the trenches with school when I was studying GCSE history, but it got cancelled due to COVID. Chapter 2, What caused the First World War? The First World War was caused by the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of the Austro-Hungarian Empire in Sarajevo, Serbia, by Serbian nationalists on the 28th of June 1914. After the assassination took place, Austria declared war on Serbia. All of the great European powers were tied together by alliances. Austria-Hungary was allied with Germany and Italy. This was known as the Triple Alliance. Serbia was allied with Russia, which drew France and Great Britain into this deadly conflict, as France and Great Britain were allies with Russia. Great Britain joined the war on the 4th of August after Germany invaded Belgium, and Albert I of Belgium called for assistance under the Treaty of London. Chapter 3. The war wasn't over by Christmas. Most people believe that the war would be over by Christmas, but this never occurred. But due to German advances on the Western Front and technological advancements in mechanised warfare, such as machine guns, tanks and artillery, the armies on the Western Front soon reached a stalemate and then were forced to dig trenches all across the Western Front. The trenches started from the English Channel up to the Swiss border. During the 4 years of the war, these lines would barely move. Chapter 4. Trench Conditions. The conditions the soldiers faced whilst in the trenches on the Western Front were terrible, as they had to deal with gunfire, constant shelling and the use of poison gas, but these weren't the only causes of death, as many soldiers would also die from diseases that they would get from shrapnel wounds from artillery shells and bullets. The wet, muddy living conditions of the trenches led to diseases and infections such as trench foot, lice and trench fever. Chapter 5. The trench system. By the end of 1914, much of Belgium and northern France had been occupied by the Germans. Although they had been stopped from advancing into the heart of France, this meant the battles could not follow along the same lines as previous wars, which had involved much more movement of single armies. Instead, it became a static war based on trenches, which needed to be defended from the enemy, with attempts made to advance from trenches to seize land from the enemy army. When these trench positions were dug out, they were dug out in a zigzag pattern. This was done so when the enemy army was attacking the trench, they couldn't shoot straight down the line and kill many soldiers. There were also different parts of a trench. These were the frontline trench, the support trench, the reserve trench and the communication trench. There were also dugouts and artillery emplacements. The frontline trench was where the attacks would be made from. The support trench was about 80 metres behind the frontline trench, and the troops would retreat here if the frontline trench ever came under attack. Holes were dug into the side of the trenches where men could take protective cover when needed. These were known as dugouts. The reserve trench was at least 100 metres behind the support trench, and was where the reserve troops could be mobilised for a counter-attack if the frontline trench was ever captured by the enemy. The communication trench ran between other trenches, and at the very rear of the trenches were artillery emplacements. Chapter 6. Day 1. We departed via coach, then we made our way over to Dover Port, where we got onto the ferry over to Calais. Then we stayed in a hotel in Belgium in the town of Mouscron, where we stayed for 3 nights. Chapter 7. Day 2. Our day started at Tyne Cup Memorial, where there are 11,976 graves. The memorial at the rear of the cemetery records a further 35,000 names of soldiers who died at Wipers between August 1917 and the last battle in the salient in October 1918. The majority are casualties from the third battle of Wipers in 1917, when so many soldiers disappeared into the mud at Passchendaele. We then went to Vancouver Corner, where chlorine gas was used for the first time by the Germans in 1915, which was invented by the German scientist Fritz Haber. This gas was used against the French and Canadian soldiers during the Second Battle of Wipers. We then moved on to Langemarck Cemetery, where more than 44,000 Germans are buried. After we left Langemarck, we made our way to Hoog Cemetery and Hoog Crater Museum, where there's a replica trench outside showing what a trench would have looked like during the Great War. After we left Hoog Crater Museum, we made our way to Hill 62, where there are more than 8,000 casualties. Then we went to Sanctuary Wood and Hill 62 Museum, where original trenches from the Great War still remain to this very day. As I traversed through the trench, I found myself in a sticky situation, as the trench was muddy and had water flowing through it. As I continued down the trench, I made my way down a deep dark tunnel that was a part of the trench when it was constructed during the Great War. After we departed from Sanctuary Wood, we moved on to Chester Farm Cemetery, where my great uncle is buried, who died at the age of 19 on January 22nd, 1917. After leaving Chester Farm Cemetery, we travelled to Plug Street Memorial, where the missing are remembered by their names being carved into the wall. 11,447 officers and men are remembered here. After leaving Plug Street Memorial, we went to Wipers, where we ended our day and watched the Many Gate service take place. The Many Gate Memorial commemorates nearly 55,000 British and Commonwealth soldiers who died in the Wipers salient between October 1914 and August 1917 and have no known grave. Chapter 8, Day 3. We started our day at the Museum of the Great War, where we saw a range of different uniforms used by the French, Germans, British, Americans, Australians and the French colonies of Indochina, now known as Vietnam. We also saw a collection of weapons, tools and armour used during the Great War. We then made our way to the Somme battlefields, where there were over a million casualties. We then went to Caterpillar Valley Cemetery, which is placed on a battlefield that was used during the Somme. We then made our way to Loch Nagar Crater, which was created by a large mine placed beneath the German front lines on the first day during the Battle of the Somme. We then went to Ulster Memorial Tower, which commemorates all the men of the 36th Division and all those from Ulster who served during World War I. After we left Ulster Memorial Tower, we made our way to Newfoundland Park, where there is a memorial to the 29th Newfoundland Division. While walking through the park, we saw a statue of a caribou and some preserved trenches left from the Great War. After we left Newfoundland Park, we ended our day at Taipo Memorial and Taipo Museum. Inside the museum, they had an explanation about the Somme, empty shell canisters, war equipment used on the Western Front, a machine gun and a biplane. At Taipo Memorial, 73,000 names of soldiers are written in the walls, as they have no known grave out of the 150,000 soldiers who died on the Somme in 1916. Chapter 9, Day 4. We departed from a hotel in the town of Mouscron by coach and got back to England via the Eurostar from Calais.